Hello. Today we are going to be starting our second part of our chemistry unit, talking about properties of matter and introducing what properties of matter are and how we're going to be using them throughout this unit. So we think back to our last part where we learned how to classify matter. We learned that all matter can be divided into two categories, pure substances or mixtures. And where we focused our attention was on our pure substances. We learned that we have two types of pure substances, elements and compounds. And we know that there are hundreds of elements known in the universe and literally millions of compounds, some of which are similar and some of which are very different from each other. So the question that we want to ask today is, how can we tell substances apart? The way that we can differentiate substances is by using their properties. So today we're going to talk about what properties of matter are. So properties, just a fancier science word for characteristics. So when we talk about a substance's properties, we are talking about characteristics of that substance. So every pure substance, meaning every element and every compound, has its very own unique set of physical and chemical properties. What we mean by unique is that this set of properties is only possessed by that substance, and its set of properties is different from the properties of every single other substance in the universe. For that reason, based on that uniqueness of their properties, we can use a substance's properties in order to identify or differentiate substances. Meaning, if I have an unknown substance, by testing and collecting data on its properties, I can either identify what that substance is, or I can tell apart whether two substances are the same or different. So if we think about a fingerprint for a person, we can compare that to the properties of a substance. So any person in the universe, you or anyone else, can be identified by their fingerprint or their DNA profile. Just like a substance can be identified by its properties. Because your fingerprint is completely unique to you and no one else in the entire world has that exact same fingerprint, if I know your fingerprint, I can identify the person that it belongs to. A substance's properties work exactly the same way. We can think of the substance's set of properties as its fingerprint. Because it is completely unique to that substance, I can use its set of properties to identify the substance or to tell it apart from other substances. Thinking about properties, we have two different types of properties, physical and chemical. So let's talk briefly about the difference between the two. Physical properties are properties which can be observed without changing the identity of the substance. That means that without changing it into anything else, I can collect information on these types of properties. The vast majority of the properties that we will be discussing, testing, and using in this unit are physical properties. The list of those are color, odor, melting point, boiling point, solubility, density, mass, and volume. Again, throughout our unit, we are going to be going into depth about all of these different properties, how we can test for them, how we can use them to identify and differentiate substances. The second type of property is a chemical property. Chemical properties are properties which can only be observed by changing the identity of the substance. That means in order to observe or collect data on a substance's chemical properties, I actually have to change the identity of that substance, meaning I have to turn it into something new. The only chemical property that's included in your standard, so that we will be using in this unit, is flammability. So let's quickly look at an example here. We've talked a lot about what properties are, different types of properties, and how they can be used. So let's look at an example. Thinking again that a substance's set of properties is like the substance's fingerprint. If we think about hydrogen and helium, very close to each other on the periodic table, both very non-reactive gases that can't be seen. However, if we look at just this small sampling of their properties, even if we did not know the identity of these two gases, we could identify them and tell them apart from one another. So if we look at the properties of hydrogen here, we see that it is an odorless and colorless gas. If we look down here, we see its melting point, boiling point, and density. Now if we look over at helium, we see Another colorless, odorless gas. So if you think about if I had a sample of hydrogen and helium in the lab and I was attempting to identify them just by looking at them, I wouldn't be able to because they look very similar. They also smell very similar. Now, if I were to collect data on the melting point, boiling point, and density, you can see here by comparing the boiling point and the density of these two substances that they are very different. That tells me that these two substances are not the same. This is a very simple example, but for the rest of this unit, we are going to be learning about how to collect information about these properties or characteristics of substances in order to use those properties to identify or to differentiate between different substances.